Hi, I'm Garmbreak1, and this is Midgardia's Cool Crowdfunding Show. I'm here today with Chris Cook. How's it going?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you. So you're here today to tell us about Unscrewed, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Unscrewed is my board game. It's a 90s cartoon inspired battle royale game for 3 to 5 players. And it's basically all about trying to come up with a plan and then watching that plan go hilariously wrong in a number of unpredictable ways. So everyone is controlling as these misfit cartoon characters who have a show on the same network. And because of budget cuts, they can't afford to keep them all on the same network. So they're pitting them against each other in a fight to the death to see who gets canceled, basically. It's a programmed action game, so if anyone's familiar with games like Robo Rally or Colt Express, essentially, instead of taking turns doing one thing at a time, everyone is actually planning 3 turns in advance. There's a limited set of actions that you have. Everyone has the same set of actions to work with every round. And once you've sort of formed your scheme, it's called, you're locked in and you can't change it. Then you go in a circle and you start resolving them one at a time and watching it all play out on the board. It's fairly spatial, actually, with characters sort of occupying spaces on a grid and bumping into each other and displacing each other into hazards like oil that can slide you around on the board, and walls and frogs that spit bombs out, and fans that can suck you in and push you around. Yeah, lots of crazy cartoonishness like that. And also, one really exciting mechanic is that at the end of every round, the board gets smaller and smaller. So there's these large rings that come down, and they essentially reduce how much space that players have to work with the longer the game goes on. And it also guarantees that no game ever goes too long because eventually the whole board will be covered. And if someone hasn't won by then nobody wins. They just cancel all the cartoons. So
Cartoons are dead forever. We're only doing live action now. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
true nightmare scenario. The art for this is amazing, by the way. Um,
Thank
the
you so much. Yeah.
yeah,
The artist is his name's Lee Nielsen. He's based out of Vancouver. Actually, he works at Titmouse as an animator. So they do a lot of animated cartoons. He got to work on the Animaniacs reboot, for example. So
nice.
this is right in his wheelhouse.
That would explain why he has completely nailed the style. Then, yeah. And are is each character like mechanically different, or did they all do the same stuff?
Yeah, so all of the characters have the same basic actions to work with. There's the 4 compass directions to move north, east, south, or west. There's the improvise action, which lets you draw from a deck full of attack and surprise cards. And then there's an again action, which repeats whatever came before it in your scheme. But each character does have a unique gimmick, which is essentially a goal that that character is trying to satisfy and a reward that they get every time they do so. And those are thematic to the characters and unique. So, for example, I'll hold the box up again here. This big guy in the middle, Freddy Frady, he's a cowardly monster. His gimmick is about hiding from the other players. So his goal is to end the round with nobody next to him in a space anywhere adjacent to him. And if he does that, his reward is that he gets to flip his card over. And as long as his card is flipped over, he gets to ignore hazards on the board. So he can run on oil without sliding, he can go through walls, all that good stuff. But if somebody ends the round adjacent to him subsequently, the card's going to flip back. So he's sort of constantly trying to play keep away for a little bit of extra safety. And then contrast that with somebody like Slappy, who's this adorable little guy holding on to Freddy's horns up there. He's like a terrifying, cute little monster dude who picks somebody to be his friend at the start of the game and spends the whole game chasing them around. His goal is to push his friend, which means enter the same space as them. And normally, when you push somebody, they just go one space, they get displaced out. But Slappy pushes his friend 3 spaces instead. And in a game that's pretty tight with a lot of hazards, that's also getting smaller every round, that can be very devastating.
Oh, that's awesome. I love Mosquito, by the way. I think that's my favorite of the all
Thank
of
you.
them.
He's a good one. Yeah, Mo's all about attacking people. So he hits somebody with an attack from the improv deck, and then he has his own special attack he gets to do afterwards.
Excellent. Can you tell me about the improv deck?
Yeah, so the improv deck is essentially the only action that lets you stand still, but even then, that's not guaranteed. It consists mostly of attack cards, which are essentially a grid that shows a space your character is in, a series of spaces relative to that you're going to target for an attack. And then, depending on who's occupying the spaces being targeted, they'll suffer some effect that's listed in the text box. So, for example, there's an extendo glove card that shoots out some lines, and anyone that's in the path of those lines gets hit and they get pushed one space away from you. Then the other part of the deck, which is I would say maybe 33% of the deck, is surprise cards, which are just like chaotic events that go off as soon as you draw them. Actually, the attacks go off as soon as you draw them too. You don't get to hold on to these. You draw them, you use them. Whatever they say is what you do. Most of the time, surprise cards are dangerous for everyone involved. So it's not safe. Improvising is not necessarily safe. And that was a deliberate decision. When I was designing the game, I found it worked the best when games were fast and something funny was happening as often as possible. And letting people just stand still with no risk was sort of working against that. So that's sort of what led to it being improvising and having a mixture of good and bad things in there. Also, every card in the deck is unique. There's no duplicates at all, so you really don't know what you're going to get every time you draw.
Like I said, this is obviously put together with a lot of love for vintage cartoons. The
Thank you.
vintage,
Yeah.
yeah. Take it you grew up watching a lot of Cartoon Network and YTV, huh?
I did, yeah, lots. I watched a lot of Ren and Stimpy reruns. I think I had season one on DVD for a long time. That was sort of my first introduction. And Ren and Stimpy is the biggest influence on the game, I would say, as a whole. But there's a lot of other stuff in there, like early SpongeBob and Courage the Cowardly Dog and Cow and Chicken, all that good stuff. Dexter's Lab. And it starts out, and I present it as a 90s cartoon inspired game, but I think really it's sort of a love letter to cartoons in general, because there's even some references to like there's a card with Slappy operating a wrecking ball machine, and he's like tearing down buildings, but it's all black and white, and it's in the sort of Steamboat Willie style, and that's called the rerun card. And
Nice.
there's lots of stuff like that that's very yeah, homages to various cartoons. And I'd say Looney Tunes is also a huge inspiration, even though maybe visually it's not super Looney Tunes. The experience of the game, really, when you're playing it, is you feel like Wile E. Coyote, right? You have something in your head, and then that's not what happens at all. Some funny thing happens instead. And then some other funny thing happens, and then suddenly your horrible plan that started out good is good again. And yeah,
Yeah, yeah. You're trying to shove a mosquito into a bunch of barbed wire, and three turns later, you're sliding across oil towards like somebody's extendo glove or something.
exactly. Yeah.
Beautiful. Uh, and since it's programmed actions, I assume everything resolves like simultaneously each turn, or
So actually, no, they don't. Everyone plans simultaneously, but then you do resolve your actions one thing at a time. That's a really important part of the game because the sort of sequencing of how things chain react is really important. And if people could go at the same time, you'd end up in situations where players could potentially end up in a space at the same time, which is not the end of the world, but you'd need to have rules to account for that. And one of the things to try to keep the game going fast, which was one of my guiding principles with designing it, was to try to reduce the rule complexity, right? I want you to have as little as possible that you need to remember in your head so that you can get through things really fast. And I think at its best, it does work really well. Like people aren't going simultaneously, but when you know what you're doing, you can do those actions so fast that it almost is.
right on. What? Sorry, I'm looking at the animated gifs on the Kickstarter page, and I've got the Freddy Freddy getting shredded by a fan one up. So
Yeah.
I should probably ask, what's the target age range of this game?
So it's 14 plus. It sort of on the surface looks like it's for little kids, but really it's actually targeted at people like me who grew up watching those cartoons. And I always love looking back at how cartoons like that were targeted at kids had so much content that in hindsight we look at and think, should kids have been watching this? I don't know. That's kind of weird, right? And I just find that really fascinating, and I really kind of adore that aesthetic and that combination of things. So that's definitely what the theme of the game is. That being said, the only real like bad stuff is the blood, and it's fairly cartoony blood. And I've had a lot of people play it with their kids, and they're not concerned at all. But yes, it's an important disclaimer to put that if you're not comfortable with seeing a furry, cute dude get sucked into a fan and have a bunch of blood spray out, then maybe pass on this one.
And then using that blood to make other people slip around. Yeah,
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
that is beautiful. Oh, there's the rerun card. No, that's wonderful. Um, I, yeah, I mostly watched Angry Beavers, so I'm sad to see no beavers involved here. But
Well,
such is life.
you never know. We can always do an expansion. I
Yeah,
do have ideas.
if
So
you do an aggressively Canadian expansion, there you go.
yes. Yeah. We could do the what's his name? The Moose Lumpy, I think, from Happy Tree Friends. There's another
Yeah, there you
tangentially
go.
Canadian one.
I mean, it also works as Bullwinkle if people aren't familiar with that reference. So
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, I've just got a bunch of really bad names for a moose character in my head now.
That's great. Send them to me. I'll use them.
Uh, yeah, I don't have a ton of questions because it is it's a board game. It looks very straightforward, like you said, but with enough complexity that things are going to go horrifically wrong in every opportunity, which is obviously the goal.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the most complicated part of the game is probably the attack cards. Those are the ones with the blueprint grid that I described, where you're sort of showing relative spaces. But they're really interesting because the first step when you draw an attack is that you get to aim them. So just like you move in the four cardinal directions, north, east, south, or west, you get to aim your attacks in those directions. But other than that, you're kind of just left at the mercy of whatever the attack card happens to say. So I also went out of my way to make very funny patterns on some of those cards. So for example, there's a bazooka attack where instead of being a straight line, it sort of shoots out diagonally and then shoots back diagonally and then shoots diagonally again. And the number of times where somebody will draw that and get really excited and then aim it, and then it perfectly wraps around the people they're trying to hit and hit somebody else. It's really funny. So
That's beautiful.
yeah, if you can get behind sort of an experience where everyone's laughing at their own shared misfortune, then I think it's really solid.
Yeah, this is a very play to see what happens kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I
I
mean,
actually have some people which who play the cow, the mad cow character, and he's sort of all about messing up his own scheme on purpose to get a reward at the end of the round if he can survive. And a lot of people, when they play him, they read that and they go, "Oh, okay," and then they just plan their actions randomly too, and they're like, "There, now I have to confuse myself because otherwise I don't know what I'm doing."
they can't predict me if I don't know what I'm doing.
Exactly.
Can you tell me about cork cards? I think that's one thing we haven't covered yet.
Yeah, so at the start of every round, there is a deck of quirk cards that each player is going to gain a card from. Quirks are essentially game-altering effects that provide you new abilities, protect you from certain things, make you trigger certain other effects in different conditions. They're not all good. Many of them are bad. Many of them are okay, depending on the context, and some of them are very good. It's really just another thing to sort of inject an unpredictable element into the game and give you some really interesting combinations of effects. For example, one of the cards that's a quirk is called Jackhammer, and it makes it so every time a character moves out of a space, they leave a hole token there. And holes are hazards that other characters fall into. It's like the big stereotypical black hole from cartoons. And then, an interesting example of some synergy is that there's another quirk called Hole Be Gone, which is Slappy's hand holding a spray can with a no holes sign on it. And it makes it so that when somebody walks into a hole, the person with the quirk, they get to ignore the hole and remove it from the board. So they're essentially getting rid of it. So I've seen a game before where somebody ended up with both of those quirks and they were just running around carving up the board and essentially they were safe to their own danger, which, in a game where you're strategizing at a very high level and you're sinking a lot of time into it, I think that would be very frustrating. But in a game where that kind of thing is incredibly unlikely to happen and the game's end so quickly anyway, it was a really funny moment.
Yeah, what is the average game length?
When you know what you're doing, they're very fast. Like, I think when I'm playing with my friends, it's probably 10 minutes. When you're learning the rules for the first time, it's a pretty quick learn. I'd say 30 minutes is probably the longest the first game would go, unless everyone's kind of distracted or someone gets stuck on something. But yeah, very, very fast games. I definitely intended it to be maybe like an icebreaker game for your board game night when you're about to get into some big games, but you want to do something to warm up first. You play a few rounds of Unscrewed, right? I don't really want people to just sit and play only one round because I don't think the game excels at only being played once, right? I think you'd be a little disappointed if you just sat and played it once, but you do a few games and you have a bunch of funny stories to tell afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, this is lovely.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a long time. It's been about 6 years I've been working on this thing, pre-pandemic, and interestingly, right when I was ready to start doing the bulk of my playtesting, everybody was in lockdown, so I had to start getting kind of creative to try to find playtesters. So I used a number of Discord servers where board game designers could test each other's games. I recreated the game on Tabletopia originally, and then later on Tabletop Sim. There's a demo on Tabletop Sim now if anyone wants to try it out. And it was just trying to find as many people as I could. I hired a bunch of playtesting services to play the game to varying levels of effect. Like some of them were really great, some of them weren't so useful. And I even had one guy actually, he was very, very nice, very kind, and was very honest, which I appreciated, who played the game. I've been working on it for 2 to 3 years at this point. And he actually sent me a refund because he was like, this is just too early in development. I don't feel right taking your money. I think it needs more time in the oven. And, besides being devastated, I did really appreciate the honesty.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's hard to get a more useful review than that, frankly.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know that the fundamentals of the game changed afterwards, but it was an interesting lesson in preparing me for the fact that not every game is for every person, right? I mean, I did change some stuff based on that, but he had some fundamental issues with the game that when I really sat down and evaluated it, those were things that I knew I was seeing other players like, right? And so that's sort of where you find the divide of like there isn't a right answer, right? You're picking which direction you want to go in, and you're gonna have to deal with the consequences of that either way. So I really appreciated that whole experience, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a wide and diverse market in terms of tastes, and some people are going to be turned off by the art style and the goofiness, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fine.
The art style, the chaos, the randomness, right? I know randomness is a touchy subject in for a lot of gamers. Honestly, myself included. I'm a big fan of highly strategic games, and I don't necessarily gravitate towards games that are very random. But creatively, I'm a big fan in design of having a really solid experience that a game is presenting, right? And when the art and the mechanics kind of come together to really sell that experience, that's what I really like. Um, and so that's what I've tried to do with this game, even if maybe it is too random for some folks. I think the people who are into that kind of thing, the art just goes with it so well, and it turns into something special for them. And that was my hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I have some friends who are only going to play this if I really, pull their ear and drag them over. But that's okay. I still love them most of the time. Uh, so yeah, this it's gonna be about 8 or 9 days left on the Kickstarter by the time this video comes out. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, it's 76 Canadian dollars if you want to pick yourself up a copy of Unscrewed. I don't know how much that is in American.
it's about 55 USD in American.
About 55 American US dollars. All right. And yeah, I think you're already funded. Yeah, you've already hit the funding goal, so that's excellent.
Yeah, I was really blown away by all the support. Honestly, we hit the funding goal in about 4 days, which was really
Okay.
awesome. It slowed down quite a bit. We've hit the mid campaign lull that you hear so much about, and then we don't really have a ton of stretch goals, and our stretch goals are pretty conservatively priced. So we don't necessarily have the same cool mini or not traction that's going on. But honestly, I spent a lot of time worrying this thing wasn't going to fund at all, and the fact that it gets to actually become a real thing now is I'm really excited and grateful about that. So thanks to everyone who's given support. Huge thanks to anyone who is willing to give more support. The extra money really only helps us make the game better. So
Yeah, absolutely. We mentioned stretch goals, and you don't have very many because it's a small project, and I mean we've all seen what happens when you get a little out of control with the stretch goals. Uh, the 15,000 USD is adding a new double sided board, which is awesome. We did not mention that there's a variety of boards with different layouts, which is again cool, adds to replayability. Can you give me a preview of what the next one to be unlocked is after 15K?
yeah, absolutely. So it's double sided, just like all the other ones. The game comes with four double sided boards, and then this would be a fifth one. So it would be 10 maps total if we get this stretch goal. And the extra map that we're adding has two. On one side, it's a very tight cluster of spaces. There's sort of a ring of oil with portals at the ends, so you can sort of hop in and out from side to side really quickly. And then some crush spots, which are spots where anvils can fall on you at the corners. So you have to sort of watch out for that. It's a That side of the board is one where characters who want to stay away from people are going to have an easy time early because the outsides of the board are more clear, but a harder time later because the middle is so tight, right? And characters who want to chase other people might have an easier time because they can kind of cover that middle distance really easily. And then the other side of the board is sort of the exact opposite, where all the hazards are kind of spread out to the sides. We have a couple of fans sort of pointing opposite directions. And then a little sort of corner of oil slicks with portals next to them as well. So as the board shrinks, everyone is just kind of going to get crammed into the middle, and it'll actually be a clearer middle than a lot of the other boards. So that's an interesting flavor that some of the other boards don't have.
Right on. I Again, it seems like you've put a ton of thought and love into this. It is nice that there's a bunch of different maps to add, different experiences.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've really done our best, and it's been a wild ride, but I'm excited. I'm really excited that it's almost going to be in people's hands here.
Yeah. The estimated delivery is July 2025, so it's not bad.
Yeah, we're hoping it'll actually be sooner than that, but to be safe, we built a lot of buffer in, and worst case scenario, it's our first time, so there's lots that's going to surprise us, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
I love the Slappy's friend token. Also, good God.
yes, yeah. There is also a coin, a metal coin that comes with every copy of the game, and I call it the heads or butts coin because it has Slappy's face on one side and then his butt cheeks on the other side. And there is coin flipping in some of the card effects. That's what it's used for. There's some cards you'll get that'll tell you to flip a coin and call it, and then they'll change their effect based on that.
That is a very 90s cartoon butt, too.
Yes, yeah. And we also have a lot of those. I don't know if you've seen a lot of Ren and Stimpy or SpongeBob does it too, but those really gross close-ups of characters where you can see like individual pores and like pimples and their bags under their eyes and stuff. We have a few cards with that kind of art too, as a throwback to that.
Beautiful. SpongeBob was a weird show, huh?
Yeah, it sure was.
Possibly is. It might still be. I don't know if it's still going.
Yeah, I've heard the new stuff's not as good as the old stuff, but I haven't watched in a long time, so I can't judge.
Yeah, fair enough. We may be a little old to be the target audience now, but
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Do you have anything that you'd like to bring up that we haven't talked about yet?
Um, I think maybe just a reminder to folks that we have about 10 days left to go. We're really close to our first stretch goal. I think we're just under 20 backers away, which really is not actually that much. It sounds like a lot, but it can go really quick. And we're going to be attending a convention here next weekend, so we're hoping that that'll be a nice big boost to the sort of last few days of the campaign there. And then, yeah, it's the home stretch. We're almost there. So I greatly appreciate anyone who's interested in giving it a look and spreading it around. That mean a lot to me.
Right on, right on. And yeah, like I found out about this through the Alberta Tabletop Games Discord, so spread it around. Maybe you'll find more, D tier YouTubers.
Absolutely, yeah, that's the hope.
All right. Yeah, that about wraps it up. There will be a link to the Kickstarter and also to the Red Cross fundraiser for Jasper Wildlife Relief or Wildfire Relief and all that stuff down in the Discord. Go check both those out and give one or both of them your delicious, delicious American dollars or Canadian dollars. Yeah, Chris, thanks for coming on. It's been a blast.
Thanks so much for having me.
And have a good night, everybody.